London, in the January of that year, was a city of shut doors. The cold had come down out of the north in the first week, and it had not lifted since. The river froze at its edges. The smoke of 100,000 fires hung low over the streets like a lid set on a pot. Behind every fine door in every fine square, the fires were lit, and the lamps were bright, and the world was warm. The doors themselves stayed shut. That was the thing about a great city in a hard winter. It was full to bursting with warmth, and none of the warmth was for the person on the wrong side of the door. The doors of the respectable houses were the hardest of all. They were painted glossy black, with brass a footman polished before dawn. They opened, when they opened, on a wall of heat and candlelight, and the murmur of people who had never wondered where they would sleep. They did not open often. A great house learns to tell, by the set of a caller's shoulders and the wear of a caller's boots, exactly who is worth the trouble of the heat escaping. And they had all learned that the young woman going door to door that fortnight was not worth it at all. Her name was the trouble. She had learned to say it last, when she said it, because the moment she said it, the door began to close. Henrietta Wendwood was 24 years old. Until 2 years before she had been a gentleman's daughter. Now she was nothing at all. She stood on the area steps of the last house on her list, a genteel establishment in a good square, and she waited while the housekeeper read her letter of application a second time. She kept her back straight. She had learned that in 2 years. You kept your back straight, and you did not let them see you were cold. You did not beg. The one thing left to a woman who has lost everything else is the manner in which she loses it. "Wendwood," said the housekeeper, and looked up, and Henrietta watched the name do its work. It was a small thing, the change in a face, a tightening, a drawing back, as from something that might be catching. The housekeeper had been almost warm a moment before, for the letter was a good one, and the hand was a lady's hand. Now she folded it along its creases and held it out through the gap in the door, as though returning a thing she did not care to have touched. "We have filled the position," she said. "You advertised it this morning." "We have filled it since." The door was closing. "I would not trouble the other houses if I were you, Miss Wendwood. Word travels. There is no situation in London for that name, and there will not be. Try a manufacturing town, where they do not know it. Good day." The door shut. The brass lion looked down at nothing. And Henrietta Wendwood stood on the cold steps in the failing afternoon, and understood at last and completely that the housekeeper was right. She had known it for a fortnight and refused to know it. Now she knew it. Every respectable house in London had refused her, one after another. Some had been kind about it. Most had not. The reason was always the same, and the reason would never change, because the thing that had ruined her father was not a thing that faded. It was written down. It was in the record of a court. It had been in the newspapers for a whole cold spring, in the largest type they had, and everyone who mattered had read it. No amount of good character in the daughter could unwrite a single line of it. Her father had been Mr. Wendwood, a gentleman of Hertfordshire, a man of no great fortune and considerable exactness. He had kept the accounts of a great charitable trust for 20 years, without an error or a farthing gone astray. And then a great sum went astray. The paper that showed where it had gone was in Mr. Wendwood's hand, or in a hand so like his that 3 men swore to it in a courtroom. There had been no one to swear otherwise who counted for anything. Mr. Wendwood was ruined in a week, and dead within the year, of nothing the physicians could name, which is to say, of shame. Henrietta had been 22. She had stood in the courtroom. She had heard her father say, in a voice she did not recognize, that he had not done it, that he had never in his life touched a farthing that was not his, that some other hand had written that paper and let his name carry it. She had believed him. She still believed him. It made not the smallest difference to a single door in London. A daughter's belief was not evidence. It was not even interesting. The fortnight had taught her exactly how it would go, and it had gone that way every time. The first days she had tried the registry offices, where genteel women sought genteel places. The clerks were brisk until the name, and cold after it. Then she had tried the houses direct, with her good letter and her straight back. Some turned her at the area steps. One had let her as far as the hall. A lady had come down and looked at her the way one looks at a stain. She said only, Wendwood turned and went back up. Henrietta had a little money at the start of the fortnight. She had almost none at the end of it. She had sold her mother's brooch in the 2nd week to a man who knew exactly how little she could afford to refuse him. She had 1 meal a day now. She had learned to make it last. She had learned, too, that hunger past a certain point is quieter than people think. It does not roar. It only makes the cold colder, and the doors taller, and the counting harder to hold on to. So she stood on the steps in the cold, and she counted. Counting was the trick that had kept her upright at the worst times. She reached 3. Then she took up her small valise, which held everything she owned in the world, and she went back up into the square. She had until the light failed to decide whether she had the courage to be a governess in a town where no one knew her name, or whether she had run out of courage entirely at last. It was there, in the square, that the carriage found her. She heard it before she saw it, the particular sound of a heavy carriage on frozen cobbles, and she stepped aside without looking, as a person on foot learns to do. It did not pass her. It slowed. It stopped. A footman in plain dark livery got down and came to her, and asked with great correctness and no curiosity at all whether he had the honour of addressing Miss Wendwood. She said that he had. She could not think why he should want to. The footman held out a letter. It was a single sheet, folded once, sealed with a plain seal. Her name on the outside, in a spare upright hand she did not know. She opened it there in the cold, her fingers gone clumsy, expecting she did not know what. A demand, a cruelty, some last account come due. It was 3 lines. You are offered the post of companion to my aunt, Lady Persis, at Oldcroft in Kent. The wages are £40 the year. The carriage will take you now. There was no signature. There was, instead, at the foot of the sheet, a single letter, written larger than the rest. The way a man signs a thing, he signs a great deal. L. Henrietta read it twice. Then she looked at the footman, who looked back with the perfect blankness of a well-trained servant, and she asked the only question that mattered. Whose carriage is this? His Grace's, miss. His Grace of what? Linwood, miss. And Henrietta Wendwood, who had thought there was nothing left in the world to frighten her, felt the cold go a little deeper, for she knew that name too. Everyone knew that name. The Duke of Linwood was the man they whispered about behind their hands, in the very drawing-rooms that had shut their doors on her. The Duke of Linwood was the Duke who never spoke. There were a great many stories about why. Some said he was mad, quietly and dangerously mad, and that his family hid it behind his silence. Some said he had killed a man in his youth, in a duel or worse, and had never spoken freely since for fear of what his own tongue might let out. Some said he was simply the proudest man in England, too proud to waste words on a world he despised. These were the ones who hated him most. There is nothing society forgives less than being despised in silence. What all of them agreed on was the fact of it. The Duke of Linwood did not make speeches. He did not make conversation. He did not explain himself. He had not, within living memory, been heard to say more than a dozen words together in a public room. He sat at the head of great tables and said nothing. He came to the House and voted and did not rise. He gave, it was said, enormous sums to this cause and that, always in silence, always without his name, so that the giving could never be traced and never be thanked. The silence had only deepened over the years, until it stopped being a habit and became the whole of what people knew of him. The Duke who never spoke. It was not a name a wise woman would trust. Henrietta looked at the 3 lines in her hand, and the single letter L, and the warm, dark carriage waiting. She thought of the manufacturing town. She thought of the cold. She thought of the last of her courage. Why? She said aloud, to no one, to the footman, to the letter. Why would he offer me anything? He does not know me. No one who knows my name offers me anything but the far side of a door. The footman had no answer. It was not his place to have one. He stood in the cold and waited. The horses stamped. The light failed over the square, and Henrietta Wendwood made the choice a person makes when there is really no choice left. She got into the carriage. It was warm inside, warmer than anywhere she had been in a fortnight. There was a rug folded on the seat. She wrapped herself in it, and hated herself a little for how good it was, and the carriage carried her out of London into the dark, toward a house she had never seen, and a man who did not speak, and a reason she could not begin to guess. Oldcroft, when she came to it 2 days later, was not the house she had braced herself for. She had expected something grim. A silent man, she had reasoned, would live in a silent house, cold and shut and forbidding, all long corridors and covered furniture. Oldcroft was not that. It was a long, low, old house of grey Kentish stone, grown out of its hill over 300 years, without any particular plan. It looked warm even in the January dusk, its windows lit gold, smoke going up straight from a dozen chimneys into the still, cold air. It looked, she thought, getting down stiff and frightened in the courtyard, like a house that was lived in and loved. That was the last thing she had expected of it, and it unsettled her more than grimness would have. Grimness she could have understood. She was taken in by a housekeeper with a kind, worried face. Mrs. Ashby, who bobbed and clucked and took the frozen valise from her hands as though it were a thing of value. She was given a room. The room had a fire already lit in it, burning well, as though it had been lit an hour before and tended since. Was I expected so exactly? Henrietta asked. The fire— His Grace's order, miss, said Mrs. Ashby, and something crossed the kind face, some private wondering of her own. He came down himself this morning to see the great Drew proper. He does not often come to the guest rooms. I could not tell you why he took the trouble. He does not tell anyone why he takes any trouble. But he took it. She twitched the curtain straight and went to the door. You'll be wanting to be warm. Sit close. Nobody stands on ceremony at Oldcroft, for there is no one here to stand on it with. She went out, and Henrietta stood in front of the fire, and could not for a moment make sense of it. In 2 years, no one had lit a fire for her before she asked. She had forgotten there were places where such a thing was simply done. She held her cold hands to the flames, and told herself it meant nothing, that a great house lit a great many fires. But a duke had come down himself to see that this one drew, and she did not know what to do with that at all. She met Lady Persis that evening, and Lady Persis at least made sense. The Duke's aunt was a small, upright woman of near 80, with a sharp, lined face and bright black eyes that missed nothing. She made up in words for every word her nephew failed to say. She talked. She talked from the moment Henrietta came into the room, in a dry running commentary on everything and everyone. It took Henrietta some time to understand that the talk was a kindness. The old woman had seen her fright and was covering it. She was giving her time, asking nothing of her but that she sit by the fire and let the words wash over her until she stopped shaking. "You are wondering," said Lady Persis at last, when the tea had been poured, "why you are here. Of course you are. Any woman with sense would be. I will tell you the part I can tell, which is my part. The rest you must have from my nephew, if you can get it, which I doubt. Getting anything out of Samuel is like getting water from a stone, and I have been trying for 32 years. She set down her cup. I am old and difficult, and I have driven off 4 companions in 3 years, the last of them in tears, which I am not proud of. My nephew is tired of the trouble of replacing them. He proposed you. That is the whole of my part. Whether you will suit me, I have no idea, and whether I will suit you I have less. But you are here, and it is winter, and neither of us has anywhere better to be. We may as well try." "Why me?" said Henrietta. "Your nephew does not know me, and my name—" She stopped. She had learned to stop before the name. "You must know my name, Lady Persis. Everyone knows my name." The old woman looked at her a long moment with her bright black eyes. "I know your name," she said. "Wendwood. Yes, I knew it when he proposed you." And she said nothing more about it, which was its own kind of answer. She turned the talk to other things, and Henrietta understood that she had come up against the edge of the part Lady Persis could tell. The rest lay somewhere in the silence of a man she had not yet properly seen. She saw him the next morning. She had risen early, being unable to sleep in so strange a bed, and had gone down in the grey first light to find the library. She had been told she might use it, and the promise of a room full of books had been the one warm thought in a cold night. She found it. It was a beautiful room, high and long, with a gallery. There were more books than she had seen since her father's small good collection was sold. At the door of their old house, to pay men her father had never owed. She stood in it and felt something in her chest ease that had been tight for 2 years. Then she turned, and the Duke of Linwood was standing in the doorway, watching her. She had not heard him come. He moved, she would learn, as quietly as he spoke. He was tall and dark, with dark hair going grey too early at the temples, and a hard, still face that gave away nothing. His eyes were a strange, clear storm grey, and they rested on her with an attention so complete and so silent that she felt it like a hand laid on her. She had braced all this while for what such a man might want of a woman he had taken in off the street. Meeting those grey eyes, she saw at once that she had braced for the wrong thing entirely. There was no want in them of the kind she had feared. There was something else, something that looked impossibly like a debt. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied, and did not know what else to do. He inclined his head. He did not speak. He looked at her a moment longer, and she had the strangest sense that he was reading her the way she read a page, taking in the whole of her, the mended gown, the straight back, the 2 years written in her face, and setting it all down somewhere careful. Then he crossed to a table. He took up a card that lay ready there. He wrote on it briefly in the spare upright hand she knew from the letter. He left it on the table and went out, all without a word. She went to the table when he had gone. The card said, "The library is yours whenever you wish it. Take any book you like. No one will disturb you here at this hour but me, and I will not." She stood holding it, this small courtesy, in a dead man's stone of a house, written because the man who meant it would not or could not say it aloud. And Henrietta Wendwood, who had not wept in 2 years, who had trained herself out of weeping as a thing that cost too much, felt her eyes sting, and did not understand it at all. She had come to Oldcroft braced for a price. She spent her first weeks there waiting for the price to be named. Everything in her experience of the 2 years past told her that nothing was given without one, that the givings which seemed kindest were the ones whose price came dearest in the end. She watched the Duke for it. She watched for the moment his silence would turn, for the demand behind the courtesy, for the catch in the warm room and the lit fire, and the library that was hers whenever she wished it. The catch did not come. That was the thing she could not fit into any shape she knew. Week followed week. The Duke said nothing, and asked nothing, and the price was never named, because there was no price. She began, slowly, against every instinct, to believe it. And believing it frightened her more than a price would have, for a price she understood. And this she did not. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. She came to know the house and the shape of the days in it, and by the shape of the days she began, without meaning to know the man. He was not idle. That was the first thing she learned, and it surprised her, for she had imagined a silent duke as a man who did nothing but brood. Samuel of Linwood worked quietly and constantly at the running of a great estate and a great deal else besides. He did it almost entirely on paper, in the spare upright hand, from a study whose door was usually open and whose silence was never empty. Letters went out from Oldcroft by the dozen. Money went with them. And Henrietta, who kept Lady Percy's company through the long days and had the run of the house, began to see, in glimpses, where the money went. She saw the first of it by accident, on a raw morning in her 3rd week. She had walked out to the home farm on an errand of the old lady's. There was a commotion by the barn. A young, stable hand, a boy of 14, white and shaking. A bolting horse checked at last by 2 men. A smashed rail. The boy had been careless. Everyone knew it. The head groom was working himself up to a rage that would have ended in a dismissal, and a dismissed farm boy without a character was a boy who did not eat. And the Duke was there. He must have heard the commotion from the yard. He came into the barn, silent, and everyone fell quiet, waiting for the master's judgment, which everyone assumed would be hard, for the master was a hard man. He did not speak. He looked at the boy a long moment with the grey eyes. He looked at the smashed rail. Then he took the boy by the shoulder, not roughly, and turned him. He put the shaking boy's hand flat on the horse's neck and held it there. He held it until the horse quieted, and the boy quieted with it. He held it there a long time. And then he wrote something on a card and gave it to the head groom and went out. Henrietta was near enough to see the groom's face change as he read it. She learned later, from Mrs. Ashby, what it said. It said that the boy was to be kept and taught properly by the groom himself, and that if the boy was ever dismissed for a fault the groom had failed to teach out of him, it was the groom who would answer for it. No one was scolded. No one was shamed. A careless boy was simply, wordlessly, saved and set to be made better, and the whole of it was done without a spoken word. She came upon it again and again after that, once she had learned to see it. Money went to a tenant whose barn had burned, whose rent was quietly forgiven for 2 years, who never learned from whom. It went to the widow of a man who had worked at Old Croft and drowned. A pension was arranged through a lawyer, so that it seemed to come from a fund and not from a person, so that the widow need never feel the weight of a duke's private charity. It went to a boy of the village, clever and poor, sent to a good school with his fees paid by a hand he would never know. She met the burned-out tenant herself once. He was an old man named Corby, and she came on him when she walked to the village on the old lady's errands. He spoke of it to her, not knowing who she was or where she lodged, the way country people speak of a wonder. His barn had gone up in a dry August, he said, and with it his year. He had lain awake a week waiting for the agent to come and turn him off, for he was 2 quarters behind, and knew the law. The agent had come, but the agent had brought a paper that forgave the 2 quarters, and 2 years more besides, and never a word of who had ordered it. Some fund? The old man said, and shook his head. They said a fund. But there's no fund walks the fields at dawn to see as a man's new barn framed square. And I've seen him do it, miss. The tall, dark one that never says aught, walking my field before light, looking at my roof tree, and gone before I could get my boots on to thank him. A fund. He laughed and wiped his eyes, not ashamed of it. I'll tell you what I think. I think there's a man hereabouts does more good than any 10 that preach it, and has took some hurt that keeps him from letting on. I put him in my prayers by no name at all, for I've none to give him. I reckon the Almighty knows the one I mean. Henrietta walked home with that in her, and it did not leave her. She had come to Old Croft believing she was the only soul in the county who owed the silent Duke a debt she could not name. She saw now that she was one of a great many. They were scattered through the fields, the cottages, the village lanes, a whole quiet company of people saved by a hand none of them could thank. They put a nameless man in their prayers, and did not know he had a name at all. It was a strange thing to be one of a company you had thought yourself alone in, It was a warm thing, too, on a cold walk home. Again and again she came upon the same pattern, the same care taken that the giving should never be traced, never be thanked, never put the one who received it under the burden of gratitude to a face. She asked Lady Persis about it once. The old woman was quiet a while. "He does not like to be thanked," she said at last. "It is not modesty. I want you to understand that, for you will be tempted to think it modesty, and it is not. It is something harder. He does not believe that his thanks are worth having, nor his word, nor anything of his that is only said. So he gives things that are real. Money is real. A roof is real. A place at a school is real. These are things a man can do without opening his mouth, and my nephew has come to trust only the things a man can do without opening his mouth." She looked at Henrietta with her bright old eyes. "He was not always so. That is the part you do not know, and I will not tell you, for it is his to tell. But he was not always so. Once he was the most open-hearted boy you ever saw. He talked, my heavens, how he talked. And he believed that if you only told people the truth, they would hear it. Something cured him of that. I was there when it happened. I have watched him pay for it every day for 10 years, and I would give the rest of my life to undo it. And I cannot, because the only person who can undo it is him. And he will not. He has stopped believing there is any use in trying." Henrietta carried that with her for a long time. She began, after it, to watch the Duke differently. Not for the price any longer, for the wound. And slowly, in the way of a house shared through a long winter, they came to know each other, the silent man and the ruined girl, though not one word of the coming to know was spoken by him aloud. It was done in the library, at the grey early hour that belonged to the two of them. She had thought, at first, to keep out of his way there. But he had left the card that said the room was hers, and she found that he did not, in fact, mind her presence. He seemed, if anything, to seek it, coming in at his hour, to find her already there, settling to his own reading a little way off, the two of them silent together in the growing light. It should have been uncomfortable. It was not. She had never in her life been so comfortable in a silence. They began to talk after a fashion, which is to say, she talked, and he wrote. She would say a thing about the book in her hands, some argument she disagreed with, some passage that had struck her. He would listen with that complete grey attention. After a while, he would write a line on a card and pass it to her. It would be an answer, dry, exact, often unexpectedly funny. She would answer the card aloud, and he would write again. She kept one of those first exchanges by heart. She had been reading a grave old book on the duties of the great. She had said, half to herself, that the man who wrote it had plainly never been great a day in his life, or he would have known that duty is a good deal easier to write of than to do. The Duke wrote a card and passed it over. He was a bishop, it said. They are great in the one way that costs nothing. She laughed, the first time she had laughed aloud in that house, and said that was unkind, and probably true, and did he never think well of anyone? He wrote again. Seldom. It saves disappointment. And then, after a moment, a second card, which he seemed to weigh before he gave it. I make exceptions. They are more trouble than the rule, but I am told they are worth it. He did not look at her when she read that one. He looked at the fire, and Henrietta looked at the card, and did not answer it aloud, because she found she could not, and put it quietly in her pocket instead of back on the table. It was the strangest conversation of her life, half spoken and half written, carried on at the pace of a man who weighed every word because he set each one down in ink. And it was, she came to think, the truest conversation of her life. A man who must write a thing does not write it lightly. Everything Samuel of Linwood wrote to her on those cards was considered and honest and meant. There came a visitor to Oldcroft that same week. A Mrs. Falkland, a county lady who called on Lady Persis twice a year out of duty, stayed too long, and knew everything about everyone. She looked at Henrietta with frank curiosity, and made her small remarks, and worked her way over the tea to the subject she had come for. "Of course," she said comfortably, "they do say the Duke is not quite." And she tapped her own temple and smiled. One hears such things. The silence, you know. It is not natural in a man. My husband says a man who will not speak has something he dare not say. Henrietta set down her cup. She had not meant to speak. She heard herself speak. "Your husband is mistaken," she said. "I have lived under this roof 3 months. I have watched a careless boy kept from ruin, a burned tenant kept in his farm, a drowned man's widow kept from the workhouse, all of it by a hand that took the greatest care never to be seen or thanked. That is not a man with something he dare not say. That is a man who has decided that saying is cheap and doing is dear, and has chosen the dearer. I would there were more of them, and fewer who tap their temples over the tea." There was a silence. Mrs. Falkland's smile went stiff. Across the room, Lady Persis made a small sound into her needlework that might have been a cough, and was not. And Henrietta, her heart going, understood 2 things at once: that she had just been unforgivably rude to a guest, and that she had meant every word, and would say it again. She had spoken for the silent Duke exactly as, 10 years before, the silent Duke had once spoken for her father, into a room that did not want to hear it. She did not know then that he heard of it. He heard of everything at Oldcroft. That evening there was a card on the library table, in the spare upright hand. It said only, "Mrs. Falkland is not worth the powder, but I thank you for it. L." It was the first time he had ever written her the word thank. She kept that card too. He watched her more than she knew that winter, and thought more than he wrote. He had planned it all in silence, the way he planned everything. Find the daughter. Take her in. Do, in deeds, what he had failed to do in words. See her safe. See her comfortable. And, when the proof was ready and the moment right, see her father's name restored. It had been a clean plan. A debt with a shape. A thing he could pay and be done with. He had not planned for the second morning in the library. He had not planned for a woman who told him he was wrong about a book, and was right, and did not soften it because he was a duke. He had not planned for the way the house felt different with her in it, for the way he found himself coming to the library at the grey hour for the company of a silence that was, for the first time in 10 years, not empty. There were moments he wanted to speak. That was the danger of her. 10 years he had gone without wanting it. Now there were moments, watching her frown over a page, when the words rose in him like water behind a wall, and he had to set them down in ink or not at all. He did not trust the wanting. He had wanted to speak once before, at 22, with his whole heart, and the world had taught him what his speaking was worth, So he wrote his cards and kept his wall and told himself it was enough. And he knew in the part of a man that does not lie to itself at the grey hour, that it was not enough, that it had not been enough for some time, that the wall was going to come down whether he willed it or no. He only did not yet know what would bring it down. She kept the cards. She could not have said why at first. She kept them in the drawer of her dressing table, a small growing stack of them, the spare upright hand on the good plain card. She told herself it was only that they were the nearest thing she had to conversation. But it was more than that, and she knew it was more than that, and the knowing frightened her in the old way. The way the lit fire had frightened her, the way the unpriced kindness had frightened her, because it meant she was coming to want something again, and she had learned 2 years before what came of wanting. It was Lady Persis, in the end, who told her why she was at Oldcroft, or told her the beginning of it, the thread that led to the rest. It was February, a hard, bright day, and the old woman was in one of her fierce moods. She looked at Henrietta over her needlework, and said without preamble, "You still do not know why he sent for you. It is eating you. I can see it eating you. I am going to break my word to him, and tell you a part of it. I am 80, and I have earned the right to break a word or two before I go. And I think you will do something foolish out of not knowing. I would rather you did something foolish out of knowing, which at least has a chance of being the right foolishness." She set down the needlework. "Do you know how your father was ruined, child? The whole of it, or only the part they printed?" "I know he did not do it," said Henrietta. "Yes, he did not do it. I know that too." The old woman's mouth was grim. "There was a man, near 12 years ago now, who did do it. A clever man. He let your father's hand carry it. He is dead now. He died in his bed, respected, mourned, a great man of business and charity. The thing he did to your father died respectable with him, and would have stayed buried forever. But for one person who knew the truth and could not prove it." She looked at Henrietta steadily. "My nephew knew the truth. He was 22. He was young and open-hearted, and certain, in the way of 22, that the truth had only to be told to be believed. So he stood up. In a room full of the people who mattered, at the height of the scandal, he told it. He named the man who had done it. He said your father was innocent, and he said who was guilty, and he said it with his whole heart, in front of everyone who could have saved your father if they had chosen." Henrietta had gone very still. "They laughed at him," said Lady Persis, and her old voice was steady and terrible. "That is the thing you must understand, if you are to understand him at all. They laughed. A boy of 22, with no proof but his own certainty, accusing a great and powerful man, defending a ruined clerk. They thought it a fine joke. The great man's friends closed round him like water. They painted my nephew a fool, or a green boy taken in, or worse. They used his very speaking as proof of your father's guilt. For see, they said, the accused has no defenders, but a wild boy who will say anything. My nephew's speaking did not save your father. It helped to sink him." The room was very quiet. "That is what Samuel has carried for 10 years, the old woman went on. Not only that he failed, that he made it worse. He stood up and spoke the truth with his whole heart, and the truth was worth nothing, and his speaking it did harm. A thing like that will cure a man of speaking, It cured him. He has not, from that day, believed that a word of his was worth the breath to say it. So he stopped saying them. He did what a man can do in silence instead, and he waited. Waited for what? Said Henrietta, though she thought now that she knew. For proof, said Lady Persis. For the thing he lacked at 22. He has spent 10 years, quietly, in the only way he trusts, in deeds and not words, gathering what he could not gather then. And he waited for you. He has watched all this while for what would become of the daughter. He could not undo what was done to the father. He could not give the father his name back while he lived, and the father is dead. But the daughter was living somewhere, paying for a crime that was not even her own. My nephew has never for one day forgotten that he owes that daughter a debt he could not pay in words. When he heard you were in London, refused at every door, he did the first thing a man can do in silence. He opened his own. The old woman picked up her needlework again, her hands not quite steady. There. Now you know why the fire was lit before you asked. It was not for a companion. It was for a debt. I have broken my word to him, and I do not repent it. You will not tell him I told you. And you will do now, whatever the knowing tells you to do. Henrietta sat very still for a long time in the bright, cold room. She understood now a great many things. She understood the debt she had seen in the grey eyes that first morning. She understood the fire, and the library, and the care taken that no giving should ever be traced. She understood the silence itself, the whole terrible architecture of it. A man who had spoken the truth once with his whole heart, and been made to watch it do harm, and had shut his mouth on the world for 10 years, rather than risk such a thing again. And she understood, with a pang that took her breath, what it meant. Everything he had done for her, every kindness of that whole strange winter, had been done not for her at all. It had been done for a debt to a dead man. Out of a guilt 10 years old. The man who had done it had never once expected, or wanted, or perhaps even imagined, that she might come to matter to him for her own sake. And she understood, sitting there, that she had come to want him to. That was the foolishness Lady Persis had seen. She had fallen, somewhere in that silent winter of lit fires and written cards, in love with the Duke of Linwood. He did not know it. He would never guess it. He believed himself only to be paying, in deeds, an old debt to a name. It was a hard thing to know. She was proud, and she had lost everything else, and her pride was the last thing she owned. It was a bitter thing to a proud woman to love a man who was only being kind to her out of guilt for her father. She thought for a day or two that the right thing, the only bearable thing, was to go, to take the knowing and use it as Lady Persis had said. And the thing the knowing told her to do was surely to leave. To stop taking a kindness that was really an apology to a corpse, to keep the last of her pride and go into the manufacturing town after all. She did not go, and the reason she did not go was the thing that changed everything. For it was not weakness, and it was not even love, though love was in it. It was that she had begun, in the library at the grey hour, to see the man behind the debt. And the man behind the debt was worth more than the debt, and worth more than her pride. She found she could not leave a man who had shut himself in silence for 10 years, out of a wound no one had ever tried to heal, when she was perhaps the one person living who might. She had come to Old Croft to be saved. She stayed, in the end, because she had begun to think that she might be the one doing the saving. And that was worth more to a woman who had lost everything than any wage or any warm room. To be needed. To have something to give that no one else could give. She had thought all that gone with her father. She found it was not gone, and so she stayed. There was a night in March that changed the temper of things between them, though nothing was said, for nothing between them was ever said. Lady Persis took a chill, a bad one, the kind that frightens in the very old. For 2 days it went hard with her. The physician came and was grave. Henrietta sat up with her through the worst of the second night, sponging the old fierce forehead, holding the thin hand. And somewhere past midnight the door opened without a sound, and the Duke was there. He did not ask how his aunt did. He could see how she did. He drew a chair to the other side of the bed and sat. The two of them kept the watch together through the small, cold hours, on either side of the woman who had, in her way, brought them together, and would have been furious to know it. They did not speak. But once, near dawn, the old lady's breathing eased at last, and the danger turned. Henrietta looked up and found him looking at her across the bed. Not at his aunt. At her. With the whole of the wound and the whole of the winter in the grey eyes, and no card in his hand to hide behind. He did not look away, nor did she. It lasted a moment, or an hour. She could not have said. Then Lady Persis stirred, and grumbled something rude in her sleep, which was the surest sign she would live, and the moment folded itself away. But it had happened. They had both been there when it happened. And a thing that has happened cannot be made not to have happened, however long two proud people decline to speak of it. The trouble came, as it always comes, from the one who had most to lose by the truth. The man who had ruined her father was dead. But he had left a widow, and the widow was very much alive, and the widow was Lady Vivian Cranford. She was, in her way, as much the ruler of a certain part of the world as the Duke was master of his. She was a handsome woman, still near 50, with a smooth, unlined face, and a pleasant, cold smile, and a manner so gracious that people did not, at first, understand that they had been cut until they were already bleeding. She had built her whole life, since her husband's death, on the respectability of his name, the fortune of his charity, and the great warm reputation he had left behind him. She guarded all three the way a lioness guards her young, and for the same reason, they were the whole of what she had. She did not know, perhaps, the precise thing her husband had done to Mr. Wendwood 12 years before. Or she did know, and had made herself unknow it, in the way people do with the crimes that keep them comfortable. Either way, she knew this much, with the sharp instinct of a woman whose whole standing rests on a buried thing. She knew that the Wendwood name was a danger, and the Wendwood name under the protection of the Duke of Linwood was a danger of an entirely different order. For he was the one man who had ever stood up and spoken it in the same breath as her husband's. She moved to end it, as such people move, pleasantly, without a mark left, in a way that could never be traced to her. She began with the oldest weapon there is. She began with the daughter's good name. It was easy. That was the cruel simplicity of it. A young woman, unmarried, living under the roof of an unmarried duke, was a thing that needed only to be mentioned in the right voice for the mention to do all the work. It did not matter that Lady Persis lived at Oldcroft, that every propriety was observed, that Henrietta was the old woman's paid companion, and nothing more. Lady Vivian mentioned it. She mentioned it graciously, with a little sigh, with a great show of reluctance, in a dozen drawing-rooms. That it was such a pity, such a very great pity, that the Wendwood girl, whatever one thought of the father, should have thrown away the last rag of her reputation, that she should go to live so very irregularly with a man like Linwood, a man about whom one heard such things. And she let the little sigh do the rest. Within a month it was everywhere. The story was no longer a duke's charity to a ruined man's daughter. It was a scandal, an open one, and it clung to Henrietta exactly as the first disgrace had clung. It did what it was designed to do. It made her presence at Oldcroft a thing that would ruin, in the end, not only her, but the old woman she served, and the man who had taken her in. Henrietta learned of it slowly, in the way one learns of such things. A look here, a letter unanswered there, a coldness where there had been civility. And then all at once, in a single cruel afternoon, she had gone with Lady Persis to a house in the county where the old woman had been received for 50 years. The door was opened. The daughter of the house came out to the carriage herself, pink and unhappy, to say that her mother was not at home. Lady Persis, near 80, who had never been refused a door in her life, sat very straight in the carriage and said nothing until they were away. Then she said, in a voice that shook with a rage Henrietta had not heard from her before, "So, it has come to this. They will shut their doors on me at my age over a lie sooner than shut them on Vivian Cranford. Well, we shall see about that." But under the rage Henrietta heard the hurt, and she knew, with a sick certainty, that she was the cause of it, that her presence was ruining the one person who had been unreservedly kind to her, and that the honourable thing, the only decent thing, was the thing she had refused to do a month before, to go. She went to the Duke that evening. She had never once, in the whole winter, gone to him to speak of anything that mattered. She went now. He was in his study, the door open, the candles lit, the spare upright hand moving over a paper. He looked up when she came in, and something crossed his still face at the sight of her, some quickening, quickly mastered. She stood in the door and made herself say it. All of it. Plainly. Because he was a man who valued the things that were real, and a plain truth, plainly said, was the realest thing she had to give him. "You must let me go," she said. "You know what is being said. You know who is saying it. Lady Persis was refused a door today, at her age, after 50 years, because of me, because I am here. That woman means to ruin all three of us, and she will do it, because a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. I will not stay and be the ruin of the two people who—" Her voice caught. She steadied it. "I know why you brought me here. Lady Persis told me. I know about my father, and what you did, and what it cost you. I know this was never a post. It was a debt. And you have paid it, Your Grace, 10 times over. I release you from the rest of it. You owe my father nothing further. You owe me nothing at all. Let me go, and let the talk go with me, and keep your aunt her doors and yourself your peace. It is the only thing left that I can do for any of you, and I am asking you to let me do it." There was a long silence. It was different from the other silences. She watched him take up his pen out of 10 years' habit to write his answer. And she watched him look at the pen and set it down. And she understood that he was fighting something, that some great struggle was going on behind the still grey eyes. It was the struggle of a man who had, for 10 years, answered the world in ink, faced for the first time with a thing that ink would not answer. He stood. He came round the desk. He stood before her, close, and she had to lift her face to his. She saw in the grey eyes the whole of the wound Lady Persis had named. And something else now, something that had not been there that first morning. Something that had grown all winter in the library at the grey hour, and had nothing to do with any debt to any dead man. And the Duke of Linwood, who had not spoken more than a dozen words together in a public room in 10 years, opened his mouth and spoke. "No," he said. It was one word. His voice was low and rough with disuse, and it cost him visibly. It was, Henrietta thought, the most extraordinary thing she had ever heard. A single spoken word, from a man who had made silence his whole armour, spent on her in a lit study, to keep her. "No," he said again, and his voice steadied, roughened still, but steadier, a man relearning a thing. "You will not go. I let you believe this was a debt, because it was easier. A debt is a thing I know how to pay in silence, and I have paid everything in silence for 10 years. It was a debt once. It is not a debt now. It has not been a debt since." He stopped. He seemed to search for when. "Since the second morning in this library, when you told me I was wrong about a book, and were right, and did not care that I was a duke. It stopped being a debt then. I did not tell you. I did not tell you because I had stopped believing my telling of a thing could make it true, or safe, or worth the risk of saying. I let you go on, thinking it a debt. I was a coward to do it. I am done being a coward." He drew a breath. "Vivian Cranford will not ruin you. I will not permit it, and I will not permit it in the one way I have refused to try for 10 years, because I have learned, this winter, from you, that there is a thing worse than speaking the truth and having it do harm. It is keeping silent and letting the harm be done, and calling your silence wisdom. I called it wisdom for 10 years. It was fear. You have cured me of it." Something at the corner of his hard mouth moved. The very ghost of a thing, the near side of a smile she had never seen. "Now go to bed, Henrietta. Trust me, and do not speak to me again of going, for I find I have got my voice back at a bad moment for anyone who wishes to argue with me, and I mean to use it." She could not speak at all. She who had done all the speaking that winter stood in the door of his study, and could not find a single word. "You see," he said more quietly, "it is not so easy when it is your turn. Go to bed. I have letters to write, and for once in 10 years I know exactly what I mean to say." The great assembly of the county was held that year, as every year, in the long rooms of the assembly house in the county town. Everyone came to it. Everyone who was anyone for 30 miles. That year they came burning with the story of the Wendwood girl and the silent Duke. And Lady Vivian Cranford came to it certain, at the very height of her power, that she had won. She had reason to be certain. The daughter was disgraced twice over now, the old aunt shut out of doors, and the Duke, the silent Duke, could no more defend them than he had ever defended anything. Everyone knew he did not speak, that he was not capable of it, that whatever the truth of the matter, he would sit at the edge of the room, as he always sat, and say nothing, and let the tide carry the girl away. Lady Vivian had built her whole plan on the silence of the Duke of Linwood, which was the surest thing in England. She swept into the assembly in her finest, and was received as a queen. She permitted herself, greeting this person and that, the smallest gracious sighing mention of poor Lady Persis, who really should have known better at her age, and of the Wendwood girl, of whom the less said the better. She watched the mentions do their work, and she was content. Henrietta had not wished to come. The Duke had asked her, too, not written. Asked, in his rough, relearned voice. She found she could refuse him nothing when he spent his hard-won words on the asking. So she came, on Lady Persis's arm, into the long, bright rooms full of the people who had refused her every door. She held her back straight. She waited to be cut, and she was cut thoroughly by 100 people at once, the cold shoulders turning, the space opening around her as around a thing diseased. She bore it. She had borne it before. She fixed her eyes on the far end of the room, and bore it. Beside her, Lady Persis bore it too, fierce and upright and 80. The two of them stood in their island of cold space, while the assembly flowed and glittered around them. And across the room, Lady Vivian Cranford smiled her pleasant smile. And then the Duke of Linwood crossed the room. People did not, at first, understand what they were seeing. They saw the silent Duke, whom they had all half forgotten, was even present, for he had been standing at the edge as he always stood, rise and cross the long room. They made way for him, as they always made way. They supposed he was leaving, or going to some private word with his aunt. He came to where Henrietta stood, and he took his place beside her, deliberately, in the island of cold space, so that the space now contained a duke, and the making of it suddenly cost something. Then he turned to face the room, and he did the thing that no one in that county had seen him do in 10 years. He spoke, aloud, to all of them. "You will forgive me," said the Duke of Linwood, and his voice, rough at first, and then steadying, carried down the long room into a silence that fell like a dropped cloth. "If I am clumsy, I am out of the habit of speaking, as you know. You have made a great deal over the years of my silence. You have called it pride and madness and worse. I will tell you now what it was. I find I have at last a thing worth breaking it for, and a thing worth saying should be said where the harm was done." He looked once at Henrietta, then out again at the room. 10 years ago, in rooms very like this one, a man was destroyed for a crime he did not commit. His name was Wendwood. He kept the accounts of the Brightwell Trust for 20 years without an error. A great sum went missing from that trust. It was made to seem his hand had taken it, or he was ruined, and he died of it. He did not take it. I knew he did not take it. I knew who did. A stir went through the room. He let it pass. I was 22. I stood up in a room like this one, and I said what I knew. And you laughed at me. Some of you here tonight laughed at me. You called me a green boy and a fool. You used my speaking as another stone to throw at Wendwood. I watched an innocent man go down under the weight of a truth I had made heavier by saying it badly, too young, without proof. And I learned that night the lesson you taught me, that the truth is worth nothing in a room like this, unless it comes with weight behind it. So I said no more. For 10 years I gathered the weight. I did in silence what I could not do in speech. And I have it now. He drew from his coat a packet of papers and held it up, and the room was utterly still. "The man who took the money from the Brightwell Trust," said the Duke, "and let Wendwood's name carry it, was Sir Gerald Cranford. I have the proof of it here, the true account, the banker's record he thought destroyed, the letter in his own hand to the man he paid to forge Wendwood's. I have had it these 2 years. I did not use it because the man was dead, and I am not in the business of destroying the dead, and the daughter of the man he wronged was quiet and beyond his reach. I judged that to rake it all open would do her more harm than good." His voice hardened. "I was wrong. I have been taught this winter that there is a worse thing than speaking a truth that does harm. It is holding a truth that would do good out of fear, and calling the fear prudence. Sir Gerald Cranford ruined an innocent man, and died respectable for it. I will not let that stand 1 hour longer, whatever it costs the living, whatever it costs his name, whatever it costs me. Mr. Wendwood was innocent. His daughter is innocent, and the next person in this room who offers her an unkindness will answer for it to me. I find, after 10 years, that I have got my voice back, and a great deal to say. There is a kind of silence that is worse than any noise, and it fell now on the long, bright rooms. In the middle of it, alone, Lady Vivian Cranford stood with her pleasant smile gone at last from her face. Everyone in the room turned, slowly, to look at her. She had built her whole life on a dead man's name and a buried thing. The thing was unburied now, in a duke's hand, before all the people who mattered. There was no gracious sigh that could cover it, and no cold shoulder that could turn it aside. She looked, in that moment, not like a lioness, but like what she was, a frightened woman who had spent 30 years guarding a grave and had just watched it opened. She did not speak. There was nothing to say. She gathered what was left of her dignity, which was not much, and she went out through the parting crowd alone. The doors of that county closed behind her, one by one, in the weeks that followed, exactly as they had closed on Henrietta. And there was no triumph in it that Henrietta could find. Only the old sad justice of a buried thing come up at last into the light. They cleared her father's name that spring, in the proper forms, with the proper papers, in a quiet room, and not a loud one, for the loud part was done. It took lawyers, and time, and the weight of a duke behind it. At the end of it, there was a document that said, in the dry language of such documents, that Mr. Wendwood of Hertfordshire had been wrongly accused, and stood acquitted of any wrong, and that his name was restored to him and to his heirs. Henrietta held it in her hands in the library at Old Croft, at the grey early hour, with the Duke beside her. She read the dry words that gave her back the thing taken from her 2 years before, and from her father before that. And she wept, at last, the weeping she had trained herself out of. The Duke did not write her a card. He did not, this once, keep his silence. He put his arm around her, and let her weep, and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. It was the fullest silence of that whole silent winter. He did not live to see it, she said, when she could speak. That is the thing. You gave me back his name, and he is not here to have it. He died believing he had failed, that his careful, honest life had come to nothing, that his daughter was left with a poisoned name and no one in the world. He never knew you were gathering the truth. He never knew anyone believed him but me. and I did not count. If he had only known, at the end, that one man of weight believed him, and would not let it rest. He knew, said the Duke. It was the first she learned of it. I went to him, before he died. I could not clear him then. I had not the proof. But I went to him, an unknown young man, and I told him that I knew he was innocent, that I believed him, that I would not rest until it was proven, however long it took. I could give him nothing but my word, and I had learned by then that my word was worth little. But I gave it to him. He knew, Henrietta. At the end, he knew that one person of the world believed him. It was not enough. It was not his name back, nor his life. But he did not die thinking no one believed him. I made sure of that much. He was quiet a moment. It was the last thing I said aloud to anyone for 10 years, until you. I told a dying, innocent man that I believed him. Then I shut my mouth on the world. I did not open it again until this winter. For you. And Henrietta understood then the whole shape of the thing. The 10 silent years, bookended by 2 spoken truths, one to her dying father, one to the room that had wronged him. The long silence between them broken, at last, by a girl who had come to his door with nothing, and given him back his voice. She was restored, that spring, to everything she had lost, and more. Her father's name was cleared. The doors that had shut on her opened again. All of them. Eagerly now, ashamed now. She found she did not much care for them, having learned exactly what they were worth. Lady Persis had her doors back, and used them to be magnificently rude to everyone who had refused her, which she enjoyed enormously. And the Duke of Linwood had taken in a ruined girl to pay a debt to a dead man. He found himself, at the end of that winter, with the debt paid, the wound healed, and his voice returned, and with a thing he had never once, in all his careful, silent planning, planned for. He asked her in the library at the grey hour, where it had all begun. He did not write it on a card. He had done with cards for her. He said it aloud, still a little rough, for the voice was 10 years out of practice, and would always carry the mark of those years. She thought she would not have had it any other way. The roughness was the proof of what the speaking cost him, and therefore of what she was worth to him. I have given you back everything that was taken from you, he said. Your name, your father's name, your place in the world, such as it is worth, which is little. You are free now, Henrietta. You need nothing from me. You have a name to be proud of, and doors that will open, and no debt to any living soul. I made certain of that first, before I let myself ask you this. I would not have you take me out of need or gratitude, or because you had nowhere else to be. You have somewhere else to be now. You have the whole world back, so I can ask you cleanly, which I could not have done in the winter. He paused, and she saw the cost of it. The man who had spent his words so carefully for 10 years, spending the most careful ones of all. I have been alone in my own silence for 10 years. I did not know it was loneliness until you filled it. Stay, not as my aunt's companion, not as a debt I am paying, not because you must. Stay because you would. Marry me, Henrietta, and make me talk, for I find I can only bear to do it for you. And I have 10 years of things saved up to say. And Henrietta Wendwood, who had come to Oldcroft with everything she owned in one small valise and no future at all, stood in the library where a silent man had first written her a kindness he could not speak. She made the choice that was wholly her own now, freely, out of no need and no fear, wanting nothing she did not already have, choosing only because she chose. "I kept your cards," she said. "All of them. Every one you ever wrote me, in the drawer of my dressing table, this whole winter, before I understood why. I think I understood before I understood, if you take my meaning." She reached up and touched his hard face, the first time she had ever touched him. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I will make you talk, though I warn you I have grown fond of the silences too, and I will want some of those kept." She was quiet a moment. "You gave me back my name, but you gave me a better thing first, before ever the name. You did it that first night without a word, when you had a fire lit in a cold room for a stranger you owed nothing. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be only a kindness. I had lost that. It was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name. And you gave it back to me with a lit fire and 3 lines on a card, before you knew me, before it could be anything but what it was. That is the man I am marrying, not the Duke who broke his silence in a grand room, though I love him too, the one who lit the fire." They were married at Oldcroft in the early summer, quietly, for neither of them cared for grandeur. Lady Persis sat in the front pew, looking as though she had arranged the entire thing, which, she maintained to her considerable age, she substantially had. The doors of the county that had shut on the bride were all open now, and their owners came, and were forgiven, more or less. Henrietta wore no borrowed finery, only a good plain gown, and carried her father's cleared name up the aisle with her, like a thing come home. There is a habit they kept, in the long good years after, that no one who did not know the story could understand. Every morning, at the grey early hour, the Duke and Duchess of Linwood went to the library and sat together in the growing light, and for a while did not speak at all. It was not the old silence, the shut armour of 10 bad years. It was the other kind, the full kind, the silence of 2 people who have said everything and need say nothing, who have learned that there is a speaking deeper than words, and a listening that asks no answer. He spoke in the good years. He had got his voice back, and he used it, wryly, sparingly, always a little rough. The county that had once called his silence madness came to prize his rare dry sentences more than another man's chatter. It is the way of the world, which values a thing most once it has learned the thing can be lost. But at the grey hour, with her, he was often silent still, and she with him. It was in that silence that they were most entirely at home. He learned to speak again slowly, and she was patient with the slowness. She understood what it had cost to lose the habit, and what it cost to find it. At first, it was a word where there had been a card, then a sentence, then, on a good evening by the fire, a whole story of his boyhood she had never thought to hear. He was never a talking man. He never would be. But he became a man who could say the thing that mattered, aloud, to the one it mattered to, when it mattered. That was all she had ever wanted of him. It was more than the world had thought him capable of. Once, years on, he rose in the house and spoke, briefly, on a matter of a poor law, in his rough, spare way. Men who had known him as the Duke who never spoke sat forward to listen. What he said was carried, and did some good. He came home and told her of it, as though confessing a small sin. She laughed at him, and was prouder than she let him see. And she thought of a boy of 22, a boy who had once believed the truth had only to be said to be heard, who had been made to stop believing it, and who had been taught to believe it again, at the last, in a grey room in Kent, by a woman come to his door with nothing. She kept the cards to the end of her life, the whole winter's worth of them, the spare upright hand on the good plain card, the half-written, half-spoken conversation of the season she had come to him with nothing, and found, instead of a wage, a life. And on the wall of the library, framed among the books, she hung the first thing he had ever written her, the 3 lines, and the single letter L, the wordless kindness of a silent man to a stranger he owed nothing, that had taken her in out of the cold on the worst night of her life. No one who did not know the story could ever say why a duchess should frame and honour so plain a scrap of card. But Henrietta knew why. Every respectable house in London had refused her, one after another, in the coldest winter of her life, and had been right to, by the only measure they knew. And one man, who never spoke,